The king leaned over the table covered with maps and whispered into the ear of his favorite general. "I know what you're planning." The general froze. No words, no movement, only the dry sound of the blade sliding. Minutes later, the body fell to the floor, and outside, the entire kingdom celebrated a monarch who smiled, while inside him, reality itself was beginning to crack, because no one knew, not even he, whether the enemy was out there or hiding inside his own mind. Imagine a silent kingdom before dawn. The torches still burn in the stone corridors, and a shadow moves through the fortress as if it were alive. It is not an assassin. It is not a spy. It is the king himself, awake once again in the middle of the night, convinced that someone within his closest circle is conspiring against him. To the world, he is invincible. But inside his mind, he fights a war he can never win. This is the riddle that spans centuries. Why did powerful kings, men with armies, wealth, and absolute control, destroy exactly those they needed most? Generals, advisors, family members, childhood friends, no one escaped. And the most disturbing part, many of these enemies never existed outside their heads. History is full of monarchs who saw betrayal in the spaces between every smile. Kings who woke up with palpitations, believing they heard footsteps behind the door. Leaders who locked themselves in secret rooms to analyze gestures, glances, breaths, as if every detail were a mortal threat. Imagine living like this. Every shadow could be a strike. Every word could be a conspiracy. Every ally, a traitor merely asleep. And the more power they had, the more prisoners they became of their own paranoia. The human mind, when placed at the top of the world, can turn into a labyrinth where every path leads to fear. And these kings, unable to distinguish reality from imagination, created monsters only they could see. But they made those monsters real, because the monsters we invent are often the most cruel. In this story, you will understand the psychological mechanism that transforms a brilliant ruler into a paranoid tyrant, and how this process, silent, gradual, and almost invisible, repeats across different civilizations. Persia, Rome, Egypt, China, medieval Europe, all had their paranoid kings, all guided by the same devastating mental pattern. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this: what destroyed these kings was not the enemy outside, but the enemy within that they fed every single day. A king's paranoia never begins with blood. It begins with a whisper. First, a counselor hesitates for a second before answering. Then, the generals exchange glances during a meeting. And finally, the king feels that something in the air has changed, as if the entire palace were breathing differently. This is how the decline begins, not with a strike, but with a feeling that grows, silent, invisible, corrosive. In historical accounts, the first signs are almost always ignored. The king begins to isolate himself in smaller meetings, consults fewer people, walks faster through the corridors. Servants whisper that he no longer sleeps. The candles remain lit until dawn. He feels something watching him. He doesn't know what or who, but it watches. This is where fear becomes a lens. Everything he sees passes through this distorted lens. When a general arrives late, he doesn't think traffic, rain, or problems at the gate. He thinks treason. When a minister advises caution, he doesn't think wisdom. He thinks manipulation. When the queen touches his hand, he doesn't think affection. He thinks, what does she want? And the more powerful he is, the less he trusts anyone, because absolute power has a brutal effect. No one tells the truth to someone who can order their death. And without truth, the mind builds its own versions. Scenes accumulate. At night, the king walks through the empty corridors, hearing footsteps that shouldn't exist. A servant drops a cup, and the sound echoes like a signal. Two soldiers whisper and stop when he approaches. A map is shifted a few centimeters in the war room. A messenger forgets to nod before entering. They are insignificant details to anyone, but to a paranoid king, each detail is a piece of a sinister puzzle. The tension increases even more when he realizes he cannot trust even himself. He reads reports 3 times. Reinterpreting sentences becomes a habit. Sleeping becomes a risk. The line between reasoning and imagination begins to blur. Then the first suspect emerges, usually. It is someone far too close, far too competent, far too loved by the people. Someone whose mere existence triggers a disturbing thought. If he wanted to overthrow me, he could. This thought does not dissolve. It takes root. It expands. It turns friendship into threat. The king begins to watch the ally. He follows his steps with the eyes of a hawk. He waits, just waits, for some sign to appear. And it always appears. Because when we look for traitors, we end up finding them, even if they exist only in our minds. The tension is now formed. The king feels the siege. But it is not the kingdom that surrounds him. It is himself. To understand why paranoid kings killed their own allies, we need to enter where everything begins, the psychological mechanism that absolute power activates inside the human mind. And the most frightening thing is realizing that this mechanism is natural, predictable, and universal. Modern psychology explains that the more isolated a person is at the top, the more vulnerable they become to 3 phenomena. 1. The loneliness of power affect loneliness. Changes the way the brain interprets the world. When no one can challenge your ideas, your mind stops being filtered by external reality. The king begins to trust his own thoughts more than the facts, and this is where paranoia is born. This is why emperors like Caligula and Domitian in Rome begin acting as if everyone around them were potential enemies, not because they were weak, but because they had no one strong enough to contradict them. Without resistance, fear grows. 2. The cognitive failure of hypervigilance. When the brain perceives constant threat, it activates a state called hypervigilance. The entire world becomes a minefield. Small gestures become signals. Silences become hidden messages. Normality becomes a mask. Kings like Ivan the Terrible recorded every micro-expression of their allies, believing that any smile out of place was proof of treason. He had childhood friends executed simply because he dreamed they would betray him. The dream became fact for a paranoid king. Imagination is worth as much as reality. 3. The cycle of distorted self-preservation. The human mind is programmed to survive. But when power is unlimited, this instinct becomes distorted. The brain begins to see prevention as justification. If I think someone might betray me in the future, better eliminate them now. This is what happened with Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. He built a colossal empire, but also killed loyal ministers, destroyed libraries, and persecuted scholars, all out of fear of losing control. To him, danger was always tomorrow, and tomorrow was unbearable to imagine. 4. The fear not of the enemy, but of the loss of the ego. Paranoid kings do not fear death. They fear losing the image they built of themselves. When you believe that you were chosen by the gods, or anointed by destiny, or the owner of immortal power, then any flaw becomes an existential threat. A general who grows too much, a counselor too wise, an heir too popular, all seem like potential thieves ready to steal the crown, and with it, the king's identity. 5. The moment the brain gives up on reality, psychology calls this functional delusion. The mind does not lose intelligence, but it loses the ability to interpret facts correctly. This is exactly where many kings cross the point of no return. They still reason, still plan, still lead, but everything is contaminated by a deep fear disguised as strategy. And then tragedy happens. The king begins to punish people for crimes that never existed. Kings of Babylon, Egyptian pharaohs, Byzantine rulers all repeated the same psychological pattern, as if they were following an invisible script written into the human mind. What you will see next is the inevitable consequence of this pattern. The first major dramatic turning point, when fear becomes violence. The mind of a paranoid king does not implode all at once. It cracks, first into thin fissures, then into deep fractures that no one can ignore. And it is in these fractures the dramatic turning points emerge. The moments when the destiny of the kingdom changes forever. The first turning point happens when the king turns suspicion into policy. he stops observing and starts acting. And the action is always silent. One night, the most respected general in the armies simply disappears. No one knows where he went. No one speaks about it. But in the throne room, the king smiles, a cold, disconnected smile. The smile of someone who believes he has defeated an enemy who never existed. The people begin to whisper. The nobles stop sleeping. The servants avoid making too much noise. Everyone notices that something is out of place, except the king himself, who feels, for the first time, safe. But this safety is an illusion that lasts little. Because soon comes the second turning point. The king begins to see conspiracies where there are only consequences of his own actions. He kills an ally and interprets the silence of the others as confirmation that they too are plotting. He orders the execution of a minister and believes that the fear shown by the remaining ministers is proof that they are hiding something. The fear of others becomes fuel for his own fear, and thus, the king's own behavior creates the very scenario he fears so much. Now, a crucial scene. During an official dinner, the king closely watches the movement of his right-hand man's hands. The man holds his goblet with a slight tremor, not from guilt, but from terror. For the king, however, the tremor is the perfect symbol of betrayal, an involuntary gesture transformed into a death sentence. The third turning point happens when the king breaks the final boundary. He begins to distrust his own family. The queen starts being escorted by servants who do not dare look her in the eyes. The crown prince is removed from meetings. The brothers, once confidants, now appear as ambiguous shadows in a palace that has become a prison. And thus emerges the most painful turning point. The king orders the execution of someone he loves, not because he wants to, but because he believes he must. History records countless cases like this: Catherine of Russia, Herod, Ivan the Terrible, Henry VIII, all cross this red line. When the king kills an ally, he saves himself. When he kills an innocent, he destroys himself. But when he kills someone he loves, he loses the last fragment of humanity. This is where the narrative changes completely. The kingdom no longer fears the external enemy. The kingdom fears the king himself. And the final turning point arises, the most unexpected of all. The real conspiracy is born, not because there was a traitor in the beginning, but because the king created an environment where conspiring became the only way to survive. Generals begin meeting in secret, nobles evaluate silent possibilities. Even servants exchange glances they would never have dared to exchange before. The king, desperately trying to avoid an imaginary betrayal, ends up provoking a real one. And when he finally realizes it, it is too late. Night falls over the palace like a thick curtain. No torches lit, no music, no banquet, no sound of life, only the distant echo of footsteps that seem to come from every direction. The king walks alone through a narrow corridor, the same corridor where, years before, he paraded surrounded by guards, advisors, and admirers. Now, every shadow seems to move. Every door seems to hide a breath. Every open window feels like an eye watching. His breathing is heavy, but not from fatigue, from fear. He finally understands that he trusts no one, not even himself. This is the point where paranoia stops being invisible and becomes tangible. Physical, alive, devouring. His mind has become a room full of broken mirrors. Each piece reflects a different threat. None shows the complete reality. And then to the sound, a soft creak behind him, the kind of noise anyone else would ignore. But for him, it is a warning of death. He draws his dagger with trembling hands, eyes wide, chest rising and falling as if he were fighting against giant waves. He advances, ready to strike the invisible enemy. His heart beats so fast it seems ready to escape his own body. But when he turns the corner, there is no one. For the first time, the king realizes something devastating. He is not fighting people. He is fighting thoughts, and thoughts do not die. This is the emotional climax, the moment when the monarch, once feared by thousands, finds himself unable to defeat the only adversary who has always been there, his own mind. The walls that once protected him now press in on him. The thrones that displayed power now crush him with their symbolic weight. The wealth, the army, the crown. None of it helps. None of it defends. None of it comforts. He walks into the throne room, empty, silent, enormous. He sits on the seat that defined his entire life. But now, sitting there, he does not feel like a king. He does not feel sovereign. He does not feel feared. He feels alone, a loneliness so deep it seems to fill the air, almost audible. And then, the door of the room opens slowly, very slowly. The tension explodes. The king rises with the dagger in hand, a wild stare, sweat running down his face, his entire body on maximum alert. But the figure that enters is not an assassin, not a rebel general, not a traitor. It is a messenger, a boy, trembling. He carries a letter, a single letter. His voice cracks as he says, "Your Majesty, they are coming." Who is coming? The conspirators? The traitors? The people? The nobles? No. The very men the king swore to protect. The same men who, years before, adored him. Now they come to overthrow him, not out of hatred, but out of survival. The king understands, in that instant, the truth he never wanted to face. He has become exactly what he feared most. Not the betrayed, but the tyrant. The weight of this revelation is so brutal that it silences him completely. His hand trembles, the dagger falls, and the sound of metal hitting the floor echoes like a final verdict. Everything he destroyed out of fear. And it was that fear that destroyed him. In the end, when the throne is empty and the echo of footsteps fades, the question that crosses centuries like a silent arrow emerges. How can someone so powerful be defeated by something no one else can see? The answer is painful but inevitable, because the greatest enemy of a king is not the army marching against him, nor the advisor who betrays him in the shadows, nor the people who revolt in the squares. The greatest enemy of a king is his own fear. Fear needs no sword. It needs no army. It needs no strategy. It only needs space. And inside the human mind, there is always far too much space. The paranoia of kings did not only destroy innocent people, it destroyed entire kingdoms, destroyed generations, destroyed stories that could have been magnificent, and all because, at some point, these leaders stopped seeing the world as it is and began seeing only the distorted reflection of their own insecurity in the end. The crown weighs more than gold. It weighs expectations. It weighs fear. It weighs the infinite shadow of what if. And that is why so many kings fell not by the hands of real traitors, but by the hands of ghosts only they could see. And perhaps the deepest reflection is this: we don't need a throne to live imprisoned by the same fears. How many times have we destroyed relationships out of insecurity? How many opportunities have we abandoned because we imagined threats that never existed? How many battles have we fought against enemies we invented? The human mind is an entire kingdom, and if we don't learn to govern it, we end up being governed by it. That is why stories like this matter, because, deep down, they are a mirror, showing that even the most powerful men in the world were vulnerable to what we all carry inside: doubt, fear, distorted perception. The internal battle between reason and imagination. If this narrative made you think, feel, or see the world differently, then I ask you something important. And it's not just for me, but for everything we're building here. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. It's not just a button. It's what tells YouTube that this content deserves to keep being shown. It's what prevents the algorithm from burying deep, psychological, historical videos like this. And it's what allows stories like these to continue being told. And of course, leave a like too, because that tells the platform you want more content like this and helps this video reach other people who will feel the same impact. I really want to know, what did you think of this story? What surprised you the most? Which part struck you the most? Leave it in the comments. I read everything, and it helps me craft even more intense narratives for you. And before you go, there's a video appearing now on the screen. Click on it. No exaggeration. It is even more fascinating, deeper, and more overwhelming than this one. If you enjoyed this story, the next one will grip you even more. See you there.